Thank you, Robert. It is great to be back in front of the Mars Society. Last time I was in front of a Mars Society conference, I believe it was 2009, just before I left. And a lot has happened there. Since then, my eyesight has begun to go. Since then, lots of things. But kind of the topic of my talk, and I apologize, I didn't bring my slides, but it doesn't really matter because most of what I want to do is start a conversation. The title of my talk is Humans to Mars, we have a tremendous opportunity. We truly have an historic opportunity in front of us right now. But before talking about that, maybe we should flashback back to 2010. You may all recall back then, the space community, space policy was generally in chaos. Everybody was going in different directions. Of course, we had huge economic issues. If you talk to any two policymakers, they would give you three different opinions on what we should do, and there was no unity within, industry players either. But over this time, since the year Explore Mars was founded, and not taking all the credit ourselves, but just meaning from the time we were founded, a lot of different things happened, and we've made a lot of progress forward. It's not all perfect, but slowly over that time, the goal of Mars is taken off again. Even though we've been talking about it for over 50 years, it's slowly built momentum. And so right now, we are in a very unique position. Things are not perfect, but we have never had so much support for the overall goal of getting to Mars from Congress. There's bipartisan support. You may have noticed for the last few authorization bills that mentioned humans to Mars, and the current Senate one, once again, while not perfect, it's probably the most comprehensive piece of legislation that's advocating humans to Mars. There's also a tremendous amount of industry support. Boeing, Lockheed, and Aerojet have their plans, and of course next week, and I'll be going down to Mexico to watch this, SpaceX will be announcing their plans. So there is an awful lot of activity right now, a lot of investment, trying to figure out the best way of getting to Mars. We may not all agree on all the different approaches, but there certainly is a lot of interest. And public support, I don't know if many of you may have seen the poll that we produced, Explore Mars. We produced along with Boeing and Phillips and Company back in 2013. Back then, we conducted this poll. We hired a professional polling company, did the poll, a scientific poll, very similar to the way they do presidential polls, and we were terrified at the time. This was right in the middle of all the sequestration arguments, so we were afraid, since everybody who paid attention should have known we had major budgetary issues. We thought maybe people will come back and say, like, there's 22% support for Mars. We were shocked when we got the numbers back, 75% support. And one of the reasons I think that's the case is because we gave budgetary context. And I think this is one of the biggest issues that face us. In addition to technology and other issues, I think some people still believe this is going to cost a lot more than it actually does. The first question in our poll is, what percentage of the federal budget do you think NASA incorporates or accounts for? And we only gave them a sliding scale between 0 and 6, because we knew that some people would be saying 20 or 30%, so we didn't want to skew the poll. The average answer was 2.5%, which is more than 5 times what NASA actually gets. And then we told them what the actual percentage was. And what I think that did is remove the guilt factor. They realized, this isn't a choice between Social Security and Mars. This isn't a choice between all these other things and Mars. And a similar percentage at that time frame thought we should double NASA's budget. And mind you, this is right in the middle of when sequestration was at its loudest and most controversial. And so I think the support is there. We just have to make sure as a community, and we have a big Mars community now. We don't agree on everything, but we agree on we need to get humans on the surface of Mars as soon as possible. And this is something we need to do as a community, work together to find ways to push this message forward going into the next administration and Congresses. And there are a lot of things that we can do moving forward. As Robert mentioned, there's this great series coming out, the National Geographic Mars series, six-part series starting in November. That is a perfectly timed, and I don't think that's a coincidence, perfectly timed for us as a community to start really pushing the message, because as I mentioned, even though we're well positioned, this could very well go wrong. We have the momentum, and we need to make sure we keep this momentum. So utilizing things like this Mars series coming up, by writing op-eds, trying to do viewing parties, and calling the press, kind of making them aware that this is possible, and calling your Congress people and everything else, because I think we're just about there. If we can keep this going into the next administration, I think we have a very good chance of actually making this happen. There are other things within entertainment as well. Another movie, The Space Between Us, is also coming out in the similar time, and we can utilize this by writing op-eds and things like that. And so there are an awful lot of things that we can be doing together to try to really push this goal forward. Other things right now, as I mentioned, our poll a couple years ago, but we also did another poll. We released a poll. It's not actually our poll, using similar techniques this year without the budgetary context angle, and even without telling them what the NASA budget is, 68% of Americans believed we should send humans to Mars. So when people say, oh, people don't get it, people don't support it, we need to make sure the public understands why we should go. Yes, we need to continue that, but I think actually people get it. As long as we can show them that we are actually going to do something, as long as we can show them that this is a realistic goal, that is important. You know, for many years, I think many of you have heard people say, oh, people aren't as excited about space exploration as they used to be. That's been changing lately, largely because of companies like SpaceX, but other companies as well, and overall momentum. When people see that it's real, they will support it. If they think it's just a PowerPoint presentation that we've seen over and over and over, they're not going to actually necessarily support it. So once again, I think we have a really great opportunity. So next administration, and I understand, as Robert mentioned, you had them speaking last night, and so I wish I'd seen that. That would have been pretty interesting. I hope they were both supportive of space exploration. I'm going to actually edit out what I was about to say because it's getting too political. But it had to do with the male candidate. But regardless, as the next administration comes in, I think something the space community has been waiting for years, I think, is also something that we don't necessarily need. For years and years, we've been waiting for the Kennedy moment. And the Kennedy moment was great at the time. I don't think we should wait around for that. I don't think we need a Kennedy moment. We need a different moment that kind of fits around the circumstances that exist now. But in some ways, I don't even think any president would want to recreate the Kennedy moment, because a big part of the Kennedy moment also had a very negative aspect, because something that happened later, to help motivate, yes, getting to the moon. So presidential leadership is extremely important, but we've had multiple presidents make speeches since then, and they have become very politicized, and they haven't necessarily moved forward. There were other reasons for that. The plans weren't necessarily great, but we have had plenty of presidents try to emulate that and fail. So I don't think we need the presidential Kennedy moment, but we certainly need presidential leadership, and at pushing the president and the next Congress to keep pushing forward in a bipartisan manner, because right now, the current plan is not all there, no question. We need to push for a faster timeline. Decisions need to be made on architecture, but the current policy for Mars is bipartisan, extremely bipartisan. And I think that is something we need to really push. Make sure the next president understands this and works well with Congress, works well with the players, the commercial sector, industry sector, to not make the mistakes that happened a few years ago when there wasn't really any consensus in Congress or other places before decisions were made. So this is something I think we should really push for, that strong presidential leadership, but not necessarily in a way that might politicize it and damage our chances for the future. So moving forward, and I want to make this a short talk because I actually want to get your thoughts on things that we might be able to do as a community to push forward. As I said, I think the next few months going into the next administration are really pivotal. We can, up to the election and then through the transition. There's a very important time frame after the election when the transition teams are in play as well. I think we all need to band together to make sure that Mars never leaves the headlines all through this time period. Make sure we take advantage of all the natural things going on, whether it be Elon's speech next week, the Mars series for National Geographic, the other Mars series. There's going to be this legislation going through Congress. Just keep the ball moving. And I think we have a tremendous opportunity, and we have the upper hand right now. We definitely have the upper hand, and so we need to make sure we get through. And I'm reminded of a quote from Winston Churchill, I think that's appropriate for our community. Never give in, never give in, never, never, never. And I think that will lead us to Mars if we never give in. So thank you very much, and I hope we can have a very active discussion my remaining time. Questions? Oh, surely you have questions. Yes.
What can Explore Mars and the Mars Society do together to help Mars happen?
Focus on, generally the groups, let me just give a little background. I didn't really talk about Explore Mars much in my conversation, but let me just give a little overview of what we are. Okay, first off, we are a nonprofit, but we're not a membership organization. That was pivotal. That was a key thing when we started our group. We wanted to avoid becoming membership, and frankly, I'll be perfectly honest, we didn't want to have to try to compete for a finite number of membership. We didn't want to compete with the Mars Society. We didn't want to compete with NSS. There were too many membership organizations around, so we didn't want to add to that mix. What we do is generally, as Robert mentioned, policy work. We do big programming like the Humans to Mars Summit, Humans to Mars Report, as well as STEM education. So, generally speaking, we're pretty close aligned. We have a different approach sometimes, on how we go about trying to change policy, push the ball forward. Sometimes we're not completely in alignment on, the mechanisms that might make it happen, but we have pretty much the exact same goal of getting humans on the surface of Mars as soon as possible. And so I think if we can, as long as we highlight that, I think there are a number of things, we could do any number of joint activities. You could do help out with various of the op-eds we're doing. Of course, we're doing this in the fall, February. We've been collaborating for a number of years already with the Space Exploration Alliance Legislative Blitz, and that one's going to happen again in February, and that one is a very important one. This will be happening just a month and a couple of weeks after the change in administration and new Congresses. So we will probably be the first major space group to get on Capitol Hill, right over after the change in administration. So I think we have it. If we can make this a really big one and bring in as many groups as possible, I think we can have a tremendous impact. So things like that, and just maybe, even if you have ideas on ways we can do that as well, I'm open to suggestions because I think it's important. It's not just with Mars Society, Explore Mars, but there are a number of other groups who are advocating Mars as well to create that unity, to show that we have numbers and we have the momentum, and don't let some of the other people who are trying to push back right now, and there are quite a few of them, don't let them get momentum. So, yes.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning to everyone. My name is Antonio Gomez. I'm from Mexico. Does Explore Mars go beyond the U.S. borders?
Does Explore Mars go beyond the U.S. borders? Yes, but we're trying to do, most of what we've done is in the United States so far. However, the president of our group, Artemis Westenberg, who also used to be a member of the Mars Society, he lives in the Netherlands. But actually our second conference was in Strasbourg, France. But since then, we haven't done a huge amount of activity outside the U.S., but we are actually starting that next year. We'll be probably be doing a European Humans to Mars Summit. We're going to be doing an Asian one, but we're also doing a number of workshops, and we're partnering with a number of groups to do, various workshops to try, frankly, to build more unity within the international community. One of the things that we believe, from our perspective, Explore Mars, regardless of how the architecture comes together, the focus, whether it be more focused on something like the more traditional approach or a SpaceX angle or whatever else, we think it's essential, assuming we're using government dollars. This is an assumption I'm taking, that it's not going to be a completely privately funded mission. If it is, that's an entirely different situation. But assuming this is going to be utilizing NASA funds, we believe it's important and necessary that it'll be an international mission. A US-led international mission, I'll be very clear on that, but have an international component. And I think that's very important. There are a lot of opinions in this room, I know, about the International Space Station, but I think one of the most important things about the International Space Station is it showed us a sustainable program. And one of the reasons it was sustainable was, I think, perhaps the only reason the space station survived as long as it did was because of that international part. That the treaties and these strong agreements, that diplomatic angle held it together. I don't think it would have survived a vote by Congress a number of years back if it hadn't been that international component. So long as we don't get bogged down with the international component, which is a possibility, it is also a way to help build a sustainable program. And that'll be the trick, trying to see how we can do that and try to avoid some of the mistakes that were made as we were building the partnership with ISS, which had a lot of interesting bumps in the road along the way. So wait for the mic, I guess, wherever the mic is. Microphone?
Last night we had. Last night we had a debate about the NASA forward and backward contamination policy, which could possibly keep us from ever getting to Mars. But is that a policy that we could try to lobby Congress about?
It is. Now, let me give you my perspective. I'm a policy guy, so take my opinions on planetary protection with a grain of salt if you want. But I do believe planetary protection policy is necessary, but I think right now it would prevent us from going. If we tried to go to Mars with the current policy, we will not be going to Mars. The current policy, we could never send humans. As you know, humans just generate bacteria and everything. So this is going to be a big issue over the next years, and it has become, trust me, when at our conferences, planetary protection has come up an awful lot. And a lot of people, we need to revise our whole planetary protection rules. Figure out what they really need to be. Yes, we need to take precautions. Yeah, we do not want to contaminate Mars more than we need to. We don't want backward contamination, but we cannot let that prevent us from going to Mars. And one of the things I'm afraid, because a lot of people in the planetary protection community right now are saying, well, yes, we can send humans to Mars, but we can't go any place interesting. It's no place that there might be water, there might be a potential for a few, extinct life. And so you kind of think, why are we going to Mars in the first place if we can't land in these places that are actually the most interesting location, plus the locations that will be able to sustain human life? And so this is going to be a big issue. And I suspect, I think it might be sped up quite a bit if SpaceX starts landing Dragon capsules on the surface of Mars in numbers, even if they're landing in a ballistic manner. This is going to bring up that issue. So I think it'll force the issue out there, and we will have to come up with some answers. And it's going to, we're going to have to adjust the policy, because I don't think anybody's going to accept that we can't go to Mars or we can't land in places that are interesting or the ones that will help sustain life. Because I think most people doing mission architecture all agree we want to land near the resources, kind of like as Robert mentioned in Mars Direct. I think pretty much most people now have adopted using ISRU. They want to utilize not just the atmosphere, but water on Mars as well. And I don't think most people don't want to land in the Arctic regions with people. So.
Should it be safe to raise that issue with Congress when we try to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think most of Congress has actually even heard of the issue. And so, I'm not criticizing Congress, but if you talk to a member of Congress or their office, it's only a very, very small number of people on Capitol Hill who know anything about space, and it's not their fault. Most of them don't deal with it. There's a professional staff, your people who deal, with offices that are in those districts or on those committees that deal with space. So it's a very small number of people who actually know the issues. Most everybody else, barely would know. The major, well-known public issue is planetary protection is something that's very important, and I think Congress does need to know about it. So. In the back, and then 5 more minutes, okay.
I think we need to figure out a clear strategy to build a big movement in support of, a let's go to Mars movement. Because as you pointed out, tens of millions of people out there favor going to Mars. How do we tap into that resource and organize those people? It can be working people, scientists, engineers, students, business people, to build a powerful and strong movement. Let's go to Mars. And people I've talked to, they say, oh yeah, that's a great idea. One thing which might be helpful is to tie in a Let's Go to Mars movement with a campaign to rebuild this nation, to rebuild the infrastructure. And part of that would be, let's go to Mars. It'll create a lot of good, useful, important jobs for all kinds of people, not just scientists and engineers. And I don't have the strategy to do that, but I hope that you and other people who are leaders of different organizations can come up with a clear plan, a strategy to build a Let's Go to Mars movement. And we need to do that pretty soon.
Well, I think the core of that already exists. As I mentioned earlier, between the Mars Society, the people we work with, other groups, I think we have a sufficient core of support right now, but we do need to make sure that they are speaking. You're not going to get everybody, but the people who are truly passionate, we do have to make sure that they open their mouths and make sure that this is the goal. And frankly, articulate that this isn't just some sort of useless adventure. This truly has practical something that's beneficial to humanity in many ways. I'm not going to start going through the litany of those reasons right now, since I think I have 2 minutes left, but and everybody in this room knows them anyway. So I think it's a good idea, but I think, through the Mars Society, through Explore Mars, we all know a lot of people, a lot of groups. We just need to coordinate this broader community that's developed over the last few years, which is much bigger than when the Mars Society was founded. It's much bigger than when Explore Mars was founded. It has grown enormously. And maybe some of these folks are not going to be there forever. They might shift. If something changes, let's not let them shift. Let's take advantage of this opportunity, these numbers we have, while we have them, because I think, if we let it go, it may not come back again. So let me see. I probably have time for one more question. I believe you were.
Yes. Hi, Bill Hardner.
Yes.
Actually, the question kind of ties into that. So a lot of people, power of the people. You talk about coordinating those efforts. Does Explore Mars have an idea of how those efforts can be coordinated?
Sorry, repeat that. I missed.
Do you have an idea of how those different efforts can be coordinated?
Yeah, I think, and probably maybe we should actually kind of continue this after. I have to leave soon after, but, coordinate this. We've already been working, and I wanted to reach out to the Mars Society on this anyway. I was kind of waiting for this talk to actually do this. We've been talking, to various groups, various different interests, both, from the stakeholder community, meaning corporations, et cetera, from the advocacy community, policy people, other people, to figure out, what we're in, within the context, particularly of what nonprofits are allowed to do also, we have to be a little careful on that, but finding ways to work together to kind of create this momentum. As I mentioned, whether it be doing coordinated efforts to the Hill, just writing huge numbers of op-eds to keep the discussion going, getting on the radio, television, they're always looking for when there are actually events like SpaceX, like the movies, like whatever else. There have been some great photographs coming from Curiosity. We shouldn't let those go. Just grab onto them and start, call up the press. The local press, it doesn't even matter if it's your local paper. These days, even an article in a local paper can have a huge audience because everything is online. So it doesn't matter as long as we keep that momentum going. So I'd love to talk to you guys about that, in more detail, but I believe, have run out of time. Or am I allowed to go one more? All right, the one in the back. Sorry to call it the one in the back. The gentleman in the back.
I don't want you to miss your flight, but this is...
Well, I'm not flying. I just I don't have much time, so...
Okay. We could use kid power. There are 81,000 kids in the Long Beach Unified School District, and we started working with them in the summer to try and experiment because the United States has just kicked off the next generation science standards. So we wanted Mars to be one of the themes, so we created the Occupy Mars Learning Adventures. So there's an experiment in California with about 81,000 kids. If it works, we'd have a very interesting program to go across the country, because if this whole room was filled with kids right now, and I said, who wants to go to Mars? Who's interested in Mars? Those kids would raise their hands in big numbers. They could help us. We got to think about this carefully, how to use kid power.
I think that's a very good point. I think this is something that we can do, my organization, Mars Society. One thing I know, I was at this workshop at Goddard, NASA Goddard, a couple days ago called, I can't remember the name of it. Regardless, there was a program they showed, NASA was doing just allowing students to, look at new pictures from Mars, try to do science themselves. And just in a short period of time, they had 60,000 students that were active in this program. I went to the next table. They had a similar program with tens of thousands of students because we were giving them something, to get excited about, something real to do. Because there are a lot of real things the kids can do. It's not just a matter of, oh, yes, we want to go to Mars. There is real science that they can also participate in right now and have a real impact on science, have a real impact on the program. So we should be pushing that more. Next year at our Humans to Mars Summit in May here in DC, we're going to be doing a particularly large push for STEM education, partnering with numerous STEM organizations and seeing if we can bring in thousands of students, but also get them online. Our online viewership for our conference is actually much larger. We have hundreds of thousands of people who watch online, whether it be live or recorded, but a large portion of that is students. So we're going to try to really push that, build a whole bunch of things going on internationally as well, with students around the world, and we're beginning to make partnerships. And so we're going to try to fill the whole week in DC with Mars activities, because we're going to have a Humans to Mars week, with the Humans to Mars Summit being a chunk of that, but inviting other groups to come in and do their thing, during the week to make a much bigger Mars footprint during that week. But the STEM part of it is one of the biggest parts of what we want to do, and seeing if we can do exactly as you said, have students really be one of the biggest proponents of getting to Mars. So I believe I am out of time. So thank you very much. It was great to be back in front of the Mars Society. Hope it's not the last time. So.